Hello, all. Welcome to week 6 of English 105 online. This week we are going to start the last two assignments of the semester, and you'll see what I mean here in a moment. These last two papers, the research process essay and the argument essay, are connected, meaning you're going to be using the same topic for both papers. So you'll gather research on a topic and discuss how you did so. That's what we're going to focus on this week. And then you'll use this research as a starting point for your argument essay. So this week you want to review the assignment directions for the research process essay. We're going to brainstorm topics, begin researching, and write your narrative. And then the readings, there are 2 chapters, finding and using sources, how and why to cite. I wish we had more time because I really do think that talking more about research and evaluating sources and media literacy is just a fundamentally important skill for all of us to have. There's so much out there on everything, every topic you could ever think of. There are numerous sites, but they're not all the same, right? And I think one of the things that this country is struggling with right now is being able to determine the quality of a source and whether the source has, intentions, right? Whether they're biased one way or another. Now, I will say that all human beings are biased. We're our experiences and thoughts and life have influenced us, even when we try to be as objective as possible. That's part of why, when you're asked to write a research paper, that you are required to have multiple sources, so that if one is maybe biased one way, then you've got another source to kind of counteract that, right? Or say you're trying to determine if something is true, and you do research and you find across 10 different websites, they're all saying the same thing, but then there's that one website that says something different. Chances are what's on the website 10 times is probably closer to the truth than the one that's on the all by itself. However, this is why we cast our net wide. We read all of these things. If you find something interesting, try to find another source to corroborate it, right? And so I wish we had more time, and we just don't. But chapters 6 and 7, finding and using sources, how and why to cite, read those. Then we have a couple of resources here, pages for you, how to research, how to evaluate sources, why and how to cite sources, and then how to organize this essay. Obviously, this last one is pretty helpful, but you're going to need these 3 pages here as well in order to do essay 3 and 4. So there are a couple things that are due this week. And you'll see here that because these 2 papers are connected, the due dates are going to be a little bit different because we also don't have a full week, our last week of class. So 1 week is a pretty quick turnaround time, especially for all of you that have, full-time jobs and other things going on. So the due date for this research process essay is actually a week from today, Tuesday, April 28th. So that gives us a couple more days to work on this part, but it doesn't set us so far back that we can't do the argument essay by the end of the semester, which is Thursday, May 7th. So that's why the due date is a little bit different there, just because, I don't think we need 2 full weeks for it, but we need a little bit more than a week, so hence the middle of the week due dates for the final draft and the reflection paper. Okay, so what is due this week by Sunday? 2 discussion boards. Okay, so the first is a way to brainstorm, right? And get some feedback on your topic. So read through the assignment guidelines, look at the toolkit, look at all the pages, and then brainstorm some ideas. So in your post, write a paragraph describing 2 to 3 ideas you're considering for essays 3 and 4. Explain why you'd like to write about each topic. Do you have any concerns about the topic? What problems do you anticipate? For example, if you choose to write about something that people feel very, very strongly about, you should probably anticipate that you are going to have to be very careful about finding sources that are as unbiased as possible. We also sometimes students will have a topic that is way too broad. So if you just talk about, I don't know, let's say, like if you were to say, I want to talk about immigration. Okay, I mean, that's a really relevant topic, something that the country is discussing, debating, arguing, protesting, right? It's a good chance to learn something more about it. However, there are a lot of different ways that you could take that, right? So are we talking about, asylum seekers? Are we talking about folks coming over here to go to school, research? You could narrow it down a lot. On the other hand, sometimes students have a topic that is so specific that they struggle to find sources. So here at the beginning of the week, you should be thinking about, am I confident that I'll be able to find enough sources for my topic? And am I confident that I will be able to make an argument about it for the essay 4? So those are things to think about. Will I be able to find sources that are, not super biased one way or another? Or if I do find a source that is biased, can I find a source that is biased the other way so that I can kind of get the bigger picture there? These are all things to think about. All topics must must meet the following criteria. So you can take an argumentative stance on your topic. In other words, you're not just reporting facts or making an argument that everyone already agrees with. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is extremely controversial, right? We don't have to do the hot button topics, although those are ones that are it is fairly easy to have a stance. But it can also be something like, I'm trying to think of things that students have argued in the past. A lot of times I will tell students to look at their lives to see if there's something they want to learn more about. You might report, let's see, AI. Right? That's a big one for everyone. Everybody's talking about it all the time. We talked about it at the beginning of the semester. But this is a topic that has been the number one thing discussed at conferences and meetings among educators, right? How do we use this awesome new tool in a way that's ethical, right? And yes, it's awesome, but it's also terrible for some things if you don't use it correctly. So how can we incorporate that, right? And so I could argue specifically about AI and writing, right? And why I think it is a dangerous approach to pretend like it doesn't exist, right? Especially here at the higher levels, right? So my sons are in 9th grade, 12th grade, and the way their teachers have been dealing with it is they have been forcing students to write by hand. Because I think one of the biggest things to know about AI is that you have to know what you're talking about in order to use it effectively. Like, you can't just rely on it for research. You can't rely on it to write the paper for you, because it is just confidently wrong, right? It's just trying to predict what you want it to say. It's not actually thinking for itself. I think that's a very important distinction to make. And so I find AI useful because it can give me ideas for, lessons on certain topics. It can help me with tone of an email, right? But I can already do all those things on my own without AI. And so AI just makes it quicker and more efficient. But too many folks are using it before they learn it and can do it on their own. And so I could write an argumentative paper about how I think we should handle AI in the classroom, in the writing classroom specifically. I could argue for, here's the position I think DMAC should take about AI. Because right now it is mostly left up to the instructors. They don't have a hard and fast rule for everyone. Because it does vary so widely in how you can use it. So that's one example, right? And yeah, people have some hot takes, but for the most part, people are kind of like, AI, okay, yeah, I guess I use it some, or no, I haven't, whatever, right? So it's not necessarily one where you have people arguing in the comments the way you do if you post anything political, right? You want to make sure you can find high quality sources that represent a variety of viewpoints on your topic. You will want to address counter arguments in this, and we will talk about this in more detail. But your argument is not very strong if you ignore obvious counter arguments. So sometimes I'll have students that argue for lowering the drinking age from 21 to 18. And to that I say, okay, go for it. But you also need to acknowledge that in 1984, the federal government raised the drinking age to 21 and essentially told states, like, you're going to raise it to 21 as well, or we're not going to give you federal funding for your roads, right? So yeah, you can imagine that most states fell in line there. But in the 80s, then you saw a drop in drunk driving accidents. So how is it different now than it was in the 80s, right? I mean, that was like 40 years ago, right? So things have changed. But you have to address the fact that it did help lower drunk driving accidents and fatalities. So you would point that out, and then you address that counter argument. And that actually strengthens your argument, rather than just having your audience sit there going, but what about? Nope, you're going to address it, and you're going to say, well, here's why it's different. So you also want to make sure that you're interested in the topic. That's why we leave it so wide open, is because we want you to write about things that you want to write about. Papers are so much better when students give even a little bit of crap about their paper. If we force students to write about certain things, the papers don't turn out as well. So let me know if you have questions about that. You'll respond to your peers, giving them feedback on their ideas, which one seems most interesting to you, that kind of thing. The other discussion board is finding sources for the research process essay. So once you are going, you're going to post your chosen topic and then describe your topic so that your classmates can understand it clearly. Explain what specifically you want to focus on related to your topic. So if for example, if your topic is minimum wage, you might explain you want to focus on the effect that minimum wage increases would have on small businesses. So then you're going to find an article on, okay, so that's the original post. Then what you're going to do is essentially you're going to help your peers by finding a source about their topic. Okay, so use the library website, find an article on your classmate's topic. Be sure to find an article you think is credible and relevant, right? So you can't just search it and take the first one. You've got to make sure that it's relevant. And then you'll include the following in your reply. So the title, the link, explanation of why you chose it, and then any helpful hints you learned from doing this search. So keywords you found useful, filters, the databases, so on and so forth. So essentially you're going to get an assist from your classmates here on your research. So those are the two discussion boards for the week: your topic, your post, and then feedback, and find some articles for your peers. Let me know what questions you have. Have a wonderful week.